They don't pay us to think. They pay us to know. We know we can beat them. There's no excuses why we shouldn't. Win the game, period. W's on 3, man. Let's go. W on 3. 1, 2, 3. W.
Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren and sistren. I am your man and resident Redskins fan, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the Redskins Report. Fight to 53. My final projection for the 53-man roster of the 2018-2019 Washington Redskins. So, Redskins finished the preseason 1-3. Wasn't a memorable preseason. The biggest battle is probably in the backfield with the running backs. We knew that coming into camp, that it would be probably the most heated battle, and it was. And we're still debating that to this day, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to the running back situation in the nation's capital this year. We'll talk about that more as we go along, and I'd love for you guys to further that conversation on the website, LouieTNetwork.net, on the Talking Skins blog that I have on the site for us to continue the conversation. So no matter what happens, we're going to have an opinion on it. I'd love for you guys to open up a thread and get the conversation started, and we can chop it up on the website, LouieTNetwork.net, on the blog, Talking Skins. Anyway, I just want to quickly go through what I think is going to be the 53-man roster for the Redskins in 2018. And we're going to start on the offensive side of the football. This is not a surprise as we start with the offense. The quarterback position is an easy one. Alex Smith and Colt McCoy will be the two quarterbacks on this roster. Now, there was a little discussion as to whether Colt McCoy was going to be healthy, and would that prompt the Redskins to maybe keep three quarterbacks and potentially keep Chris Hogan on the roster, or Kevin Hogan, on the roster. I don't think Colt McCoy's injury is going to force the Redskins to do something as drastic as hold a roster spot for an extra guy that doesn't need to be on the roster. Alex Smith is healthy. We expect him to start. We expect him to stay healthy. And if Colt McCoy has anything wrong that they're worried about, I think he'll be able to heal up and be on the mend while Alex Smith is playing football for the Redskins as the starting quarterback. So I think that's pretty much etched in stone, your two quarterbacks, Alex Smith and Colt McCoy. And what you will find with these names that I've put down for each position, I've put them in the order of which I think they made the roster. So, for instance, at the running back position, whomever is last is the guy that I felt like was the last one to make the team. And if they were going to make a cut at that position, that last name would be the first guy to be gone. The only position I didn't do that for was the offensive line, because I wanted to put that in the order from left to right of the starters. And then after that, I put it in importance of the guys that were on the team. So we move on to the running back position. I think that's the most talked about and speculated position on this football team and on this roster. And I think it's going to end up being the guys that we thought it was going to be going into camp, minus Adrian Peterson, of course. We thought that guy, instead of Adrian Peterson, would be Darius Geis, but nonetheless, that's pretty much what we had pegged in as the group of backs that we would take into the season. Now, I think some injuries really changed the dynamics of this group as the preseason wore on. I think going into camp, that was the list right there that you see in front of you, minus Adrian Peterson, enter in Darius Geis. Now, after the first preseason game, I was convinced that they really were going to give a hard look at a couple of the other running backs in the backfield. I really thought that Capri Bibbs would get a look-see, and he did. But I think they feel like he's got more time on the practice squad. He's still eligible, hasn't had enough NFL snaps to disqualify him from being eligible on the practice squad. So they feel like, hey, we can sneak Capri Bibbs onto the practice squad if we need him. We can call him up. But the guy that I really thought was going to make this team was Byron Marshall, and I thought either Robert Kelly or Samaje Perine, really just Robert Kelly. Perine, to me, wasn't getting cut until he had the injury, and then the fumbles continued, and then I started to look at Samaje Perine in a different light. And I said, and it was funny because one Redskin fan earlier in the offseason said Samaje Perine was getting cut, and I said, are you crazy? Samaje Perine is not getting cut, and he continued to say Perine was going to get cut. Perine could get cut. That's not a given that he makes this roster, but right now I have it as the Redskins keeping 4 backs. Adrian Peterson, we know he's going to start for this team, so he's definitely making the team. So is Chris Thompson. CT 25, going to be on this football team. Robert Kelly, I think Jay Gruden loves Robert Kelly. He's a core special teamer. And what Robert Kelly has shown this preseason is something that we didn't really know he was capable of. It's catching the football. Robert Kelly does everything very solidly. Nothing great. Nothing stands out about his game, but he does everything good enough to make an NFL roster. And I think Jay Gruden appreciates him. Similar to the way he appreciated Ryan Grant when he was here. He appreciates Robert Kelly. I think he's going to make this roster. And Samaje Perine, I think he's the guy that's on the bubble. He's the guy that if someone's going to get cut in favor of, say, a Capri Bibbs, it'd be Samaje Perine right now. He fumbled again last night in the Ravens game. He has an issue holding on to the football. That could be an issue moving forward. He's not a core special teamer like a Robert Kelly. So Samaje Perine is a guy that is on the chopping block for sure, but I think the Redskins do not want to give up on a guy they spent a mid-round pick on just a season ago. It's too early for them in their minds to give up on a guy that they think has talent. And we've seen him do some good things when he's not fumbling the football or he's not hurt. We've seen Samaje Perine do some good things. I think they're going to continue to want to work with him, fearing that if they cut him, he's going to latch on elsewhere and they won't have access to him as a practice squad player. So you go from there to the wide receivers. And in past years, the Redskins have kept 5 receivers. This year, I think they're going to keep 6. And this is an interesting group. So Josh Doctson definitely making the team. Paul Richardson, Jamison Crowder. Trey Quinn is a guy that I thought he cemented his status in that Ravens final preseason game, but he was going to make the team before that. I told you they really like him, and they look at him as a replacement for Jamison Crowder. In case anything were to happen to Crowder, remember, Crowder's been dealing with injuries, and he didn't play all preseason because they wanted to make sure he was ready for week 1. Trey Quinn is a guy that can back up that slot position, and you don't feel like the drop-off is necessarily that great. You look at the rest of the guys on this list, none of them can really play the slot, maybe except Paul Richardson. None of these guys can fill that void in the slot if something were to happen to Jamison Crowder. And so if J.C. Ice were to go down, now they feel comfortable that they have another guy that can step in and fill that role in Trey Quinn. So he's going to make this team. Maurice Harris would have been the 4th name instead of the 5th. He would have been a guy that would have been on this roster over a Trey Quinn. But the injuries that he's sustained over the last 2 years, mainly concussions, he's got another one in camp, they're starting to worry me to the point where I'm saying to myself, is he a guy that you can rely on? And I think the Redskins are thinking the same thing. Hey, is this guy going to get another concussion? Is he going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks the next time this happens? And thinking that they love Maurice Harris. They love Mo Harris. They love what he brings on special teams. They love what this guy is as a receiver. And they want that big body guy on the roster. So to make sure that in the event Mo Harris can't go, you keep Cam Sims. Gives you the same type of flexibility that a Mo Harris does. A guy that's big, long, pause, and the ability to play special teams. So Cam Sims, to me, is an insurance policy for Mo Harris. And so I think Cam Sims makes it as the 6th and final receiver. And I think he's done so much in this preseason as Cam Sims that they can't sneak him onto the practice squad. With Brian Quick, that's a guy that you like, and he did some good things in that Ravens game as well, and they love him on special teams. However, Brian Quick is a guy that I think they feel like they can cut loose, and they'll be able to pick up the phone and call him in week 5 if they need him. Cam Sims gets cut, someone else is going to see a young, talented football player that just needs an opportunity, and they're going to snatch him up, and I think the Redskins are fearful of that, and so they're going to keep Cam Sims over a guy like Brian Quick as we move on to the next set of players on this roster, and that is the tight end position. This one is pretty simple for me. There's 3 guys on this football team that are going to make it at the tight end position. It's always been 3. Jordan Reed, Vernon Davis, Jeremy Sprinkle. Those were the 3 going in. That's been the consistent 3 throughout, and that's the 3 that I have right now. I was hoping that a guy like J.P. Holtz could make this football team as a 4th tight end, and here's my thought process with him. I listened to Jay Gruden about a week ago after a practice talk about J.P. Holtz, and it was right after that last game, that third preseason game versus the Broncos, where he was phenomenal as a lead blocker in front of Adrian Peterson. And they asked him about J.P. Holtz and could anybody else on this roster fill that particular position as a lead blocker other than Holtz. And Jay Gruden said no. He's really the only guy on the roster that can do this. So at that moment, I got excited, and I thought maybe they could keep 4 tight ends and have J.P. Holtz be that lead blocker that AP desperately needs, because he's much better with a lead blocker in front of him than without him. Now, AP has also had success out of single back with no lead blocker. He's done it throughout his career, but I'm more comfortable with him in the I formation with a lead blocker, or an offset formation with the lead blocker. Either way, I'm more comfortable with him having someone lead the way in front of him with an ISO or a power. But Jay Gruden, after saying that, he then went and said, yeah, JP has done a good job at that, and we really like him in that role. And if we decided to do that, he'd be the guy to do it. So I got excited, and then Jay crushed my hopes and dreams by saying, but we don't run a lot of that, and if need be, we could teach one of the other guys to do it, but because we don't do it as often. And AD is, and he said AD is pretty good at running out of the single back and some of the things that we have already installed. So we'll take a look at everything. So that told me he's not making the roster. I said, shit. So no extra tight end, 3 tight ends, the same 3 that we thought going in: Jordan Reed, Vernon Davis, Jeremy Sprinkle. So this is the position that I whiffed on last year. It's the offensive line. I thought the Redskins were keeping 7. I think they ended up keeping 9 last year. I was way off. So I'm a little bit more judicious this year with the 9 that I have them keeping. Obviously, you've got the starting 5 of Trent Williams, Sean Laval, Chase Rouillet, Brandon Sheriff, and Morgan Moses. We also know 2 more guys are locked in for sure, as Ty Nsekhe and Jerron Christian are both locked to make this roster as well. So there you have 7 for sure. Now, I just mentioned Ty Nsekhe and Jerron Christian as backups. They're both tackles. You have no interior depth. If one of those interior positions were to get injured, enter in Casey Dunn. I'm not thrilled about the depth we have at the interior positions. If anything were to happen to, say, Chase Rouillet, we're screwed. We don't have another really good center or guard on the roster that we like, that we could just say, hey, you go in and you play center, which is why I never wanted them to get rid of the center that we had, John Sullivan, a couple of years ago. Matter of fact, I think he was on the roster 2 years ago. I wanted us to keep John Sullivan because he did a really good job when he came in, when we had the injuries to Spencer Long. And I don't love what we have on the interior. We better pray that Sean Laval doesn't decide to get hurt in week 2 like he always does, or have some kind of early season injury like he usually does and misses a ton of games, like a stinger or an ankle injury or a shoulder or something that we've seen him miss time with. And we were all begging for Sean Laval to be out of here. We need Sean Laval because the depth at the guard and center positions is so razor thin that we're keeping a guy like Tony Bergstrom on the roster, who I think is an absolute bum. He was the guy that got called for the holding penalty and gave up the fumble when Perine was hit last night. He held the guy and still let the guy strip Perine of the football and recover it. So Tony Bergstrom is a bum, and he's a tackle by trade that we kicked inside to guard. So if we're asking Bergstrom to play guard, we're in a lot of trouble. So hopefully the Redskins will be scouring other teams' cuts when they drop their rosters down to 53. I hope someone cuts a really quality interior offensive lineman and the Redskins go ahead and make that acquisition, because right now Casey Dunn and Tony Bergstrom scare me as interior backups along the offensive line. We need help. We need depth. We need 2 offensive linemen, a center and a guard, off of someone else's roster that we can trust. Hell, I'll take one that's a combo that can do both, a guard and a center. And if you want to keep Dunn, fine. But I don't want Bergstrom on the roster. To me, that's why I have those asterisks near his name. He's the first guy to go if someone else needs to make this roster. If they need to make a space for another guy to make the roster, Tony Bergstrom, to me, is the first man gone off of the 53-man roster. So, in essence, there are 24 total offensive players. 9 offensive linemen, 3 tight ends. That's a total of 12. You have 4 running backs. That's 16. You have 6 receivers. That's 22. 2 quarterbacks makes 24. So we go from there to the defensive side of the football, and we start along the defensive line. I think we're going to keep 6, but keep in mind that there will be a 7th defensive lineman added to the mix after week 6. Stacey McGee comes off the PUP list. He will rejoin the football team. At that point, someone else will be pushed down. Not saying it's going to be a defensive lineman, but someone at another position will have to go to make space for Stacey McGee. Who knows? There may be an injury along the defensive line, and he may come just in the nick of time. We'll see. But at some point, Stacey McGee will be joining this team, and they will have to make space for him. But because he's on the PUP list, he doesn't count against the 53-man roster. So it looks as follows: Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, Matt Ioannidis, Tim Settle, Ziggy Hood, and Anthony Lanier. To me, that might be the most rock-solid position on the football team as it's constituted right now. And this group of guys isn't up for debate. They're definitely making the roster. Those 6 players are definitely on this football team. Could they end up keeping a guy along the defensive line that we hoped would give us something last year that wasn't able to stay healthy, and we really thought could help us a lot along the defensive line as a defensive tackle in Phil Taylor? I don't see it happening. Phil Taylor didn't get a lot of snaps this preseason, so that leads me to believe that they are going in a totally different direction. However, stranger things have happened. They may cut bait at another position, like offensive line, to add another defensive lineman. I think they're going to roll with 6 right now, and a guy like Phil Taylor will be on speed dial if anything were to happen to one of the interior defensive linemen. But then you go to the linebacker position, and this is a lot. We're keeping 10 linebackers, and this was the position we had a conversation about maybe 2 weeks ago when we talked about the linebackers. I think we were watching the 3rd preseason game live, the Broncos game, and someone had asked about the linebackers and said, do you think Sean Dion Hamilton is making the roster? And I'm like, I don't know, because there are a number of linebackers that are in front of him, but I said they really like his talent. They feel like they got a steal in the 5th round. I don't think they're going to cut bait with a guy that they think isn't fully healthy yet, but when he does get healthy, could be a starting linebacker in this league. So the way it looks right now, Kerrigan and Preston Smith are your starters. Ryan Anderson and Pernell McPhee definitely making the rosters as backups to Kerrigan and Preston Smith. Then you look at the inside linebacker positions. Zach Brown and Mason Foster are your starters there. Behind them, Martrell Spate to me is the first guy that gets in if something were to happen to both either Brown or Foster. Josh Harvey Clemens is a guy that they like in coverage situations as a nickel backer, so they really like what he brings to the table there. Zach Vigil is a guy that I think is going to be the new Will Compton. He's going to be the guy that fills in a pinch if something were to go wrong at the linebacker position. They feel comfortable with Zach Vigil being put onto the field. We saw him get a lot of reps last year late in the season with all the injuries, and I thought he actually handled those situations very well. And so I think they trust Zach Vigil in the way that they trusted Will Compton when he was here in D.C. And Sean Dion Hamilton is the last guy to make this room at the linebacker position. I just think his talent is too much to overlook. They really think that this guy, when fully healthy, and I still think he's not fully healthy, and I think they think he's not fully healthy, and they feel like once he gets all the way back, this guy could be a starter down the road and take over a Mason Foster's position or someone of that ilk. So Sean Dion Hamilton, I think, is the final man to make the roster at the linebacker position as we move on to the secondary. And this one is a pretty cut and dry one here. Once they made the move to get rid of Orlando Scandrick, we pretty much knew that that was for Danny Johnson. So all the other positions were already spoken for. Josh Norman was making his football team. Quentin Dunbar, those are your 2 starters, so definitely on the roster. Fabian Moreau, Fab was definitely on this roster. They felt like they got a steal in him in the 3rd round last year, and he's going to eventually, I think, start. And right now he's our starting nickel. I think eventually they're going to treat him like they did Kendall Fuller. They're going to start him in the slot as the nickel, and if he performs well enough, eventually they're going to push him to the outside and look to see if he can't play as a boundary corner, which is what he did at UCLA. Greg Stroman is another guy that they really like. I've liked what I've seen out of him in the preseason. He's definitely making his football team as a draft pick. Adonis Alexander, they love his length, his size, They love his ability to play press man-to-man. And I've been impressed with his ability to look back to the football. Remember, one of my knocks on him at Virginia Tech was that he didn't always look back. He did look back sometimes, but he didn't look back enough. All preseason long, this guy's been looking for the football. I think and again, I should have known that the coaching that this man was going to get by the Redskins, we all know how we feel about Torian Gray. Whatever this man touches turns to gold. And I'm going to tell you right now, if Adonis Alexander continues on the path that he's on in terms of his coverage skills under Torian Gray, and that's part of the reason why I think the Redskins went ahead and spent the 6th-round pick on him, is because Torian Gray says, I know this kid. I know what he's capable of. Let me get my hands on him again. And I'm telling you right now, we could have ourselves a diamond in the rough. Adonis Alexander looks damn good. And a lot of that credit must be given to Torian Gray yet again, because this man was not looking enough at Virginia Tech. Man, this guy is finding the football thus far in the limited snaps that I've seen him at the NFL level, which is very, very impressive. And then Danny Johnson, who I thought in the Patriots preseason game, the first game, pretty much made a statement that says, hey, I'm trying to make this roster, and I'm serious about making this roster. He must have had a strong camp. That first preseason game versus New England pretty much solidified it for the Redskins, because right thereafter, that's when they cut Orlando Scandrick. So Danny Johnson on this roster as well. Then you get to the safety position. DJ Swearinger definitely on the team, along with fellow starting safety Monte Nicholson. Also, Troy Apke, a 3rd or 4th-round pick, definitely making this football team. And then DeShazer Everett is the utility man basically at the safety position, a guy that they rely on. Similar to Reed Dowdy back in the day, whenever you're in a pinch, DeShazer Everett is the man that they call on. He's definitely on this football team as well. So you get 10 defensive backs, 6 of which are corners, 4 of which are safeties. So that gives you a defensive total of 26. So 24 offensive players, 26 defensive players. Remember, 10 defensive backs, 10 linebackers, 6 defensive linemen for a total of 26. You add that to the 24 on the offensive side, that gives you a 50-man roster. And then, of course, don't want to forget about your specialists. 3 of those guys, and it's the 3 that we've had the last few seasons, and it's not going to change. Dustin Hopkins just got a new deal from the Redskins. He's going to be our place kicker. Tress Way has been outstanding for us as a punter, and Nick Sundberg has been a standout as a long snapper for this team for many years. So that is the Redskins' 53-man roster in a nutshell. I think I'm pretty comfortable with what I've come up with this year. I was off by about 5 or 8 selections last year. I can't quite remember if I got 45 out of the 53 or 48 out of the 53, but I was pretty far off last year. I think I'm pretty close. I may be 1 or 2 off. I really want to see them upgrade the offensive line, interior depth specifically. I feel good about our backup tackles, Ty Nsekhe and Jerron Christian. If something were to happen to Morgan Moses or Trent Williams, I feel good about the depth we have this year. If we can keep Ty Nsekhe healthy. Last year he had the core muscle injury that kept him out for quite a while after that Raiders game. We were all kinds of banged up along that offensive line. Even our depth was tested with some injuries. If we could just get some interior depth off of someone else's roster. I do not like what we have on the interior of our offensive line right now, but if we were able to go kind of purge some of the teams and some of the players that will be released and peruse through some of those guys and pick one that had a strong preseason that we think has a bright future, I'd love to see the Redskins go out and do that, because I am not comfortable with what we're trying to put on the field potentially as interior offensive linemen, as backups. The depth there is razor thin, and I'm very uncomfortable. That's the only position right now that I'm uncomfortable with, period. I love every position on this team, and I think we're in a position to compete at a very high level with the guys that are going to make this roster if, and this is the big word, and this is the caveat, if we're able to stay healthy. I've got a renewed sense of optimism because of Adrian Peterson's presence on this roster. AD makes me feel like we can run the football, and if we can run the football, Alex Smith doesn't have to win the game by himself. And if Alex Smith doesn't have to win the game by himself, he can just be Alex Smith. And if Alex Smith can just be Alex Smith, he's good for 9, 10, or 11 wins. He's shown that over the last 7 or 8 years of his career. You let Alex Smith be Alex Smith, he'll get you 9, 10, or 11 wins. And so, sign me up for some of that action. If we can run the football, I think everything else will fall into place. Paul Richardson will get to take the top off of defenses. He'll get to run, play action fake, and go vertical and use his speed to be a difference maker. Josh Doctson will get to work the middle of the football field and may have some one-on-one situations where he'll be able, because teams will feel the need to maybe put an extra safety and an extra defender in the box. Now Josh Doctson has one-on-one with a defender outside. He can climb the ladder and go get the football. We've seen him do it before. I have confidence that Josh Doctson is ready for a breakout season. And so all these things I feel like are predicated off of balance. And I think AP is going to give us that. AD, is going to give us that in 2018, which makes me a little bit more confident about this season than I was after the Geis injury. So that's my final 53-man projection. Give me yours. What do you think is going to be this Redskins roster, and what position are you least comfortable with? Well, let's continue this discussion on the website louietnetwork.net using the Talking Skins blog. What positions are you the least comfortable with? What positions are you most confident in? Who should make the roster? Who shouldn't make the roster? And who would be the first guy to go for you if you were in charge of this roster? If you needed to bring another guy on, who would be one of the first guys off this Redskins roster? I'm your man, Louie T. Remember, I am a Redskins fan, etched in burgundy and gold. My Redskins spirit will never die. Redskins spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, hail to our beloved Washington Redskins. I will see you guys next week when we prepare for our first opponent in 2018, the Arizona Cardinals. Until then, I'm your man, Louie T. See you next time.
Louie T Network.